Chosen ones, what you are about to hear is not meant for the casual listener. The signal that broke through the Vatican's encrypted channels was not a mere message, but a dossier, sealed under layers of secrecy and marked with your very name. It was never supposed to leave the catacombs, never meant to reach the eyes of those in the Oval Office. And yet, when the transmission arrived, the world's most secure lines went silent. A blackout across communications followed, as if the act of opening your profile had shifted something in the hidden architecture of power itself. Inside these documents were fragments, scattered coordinates, transcripts of conversations you were never a part of, and images from years that should not contain you. The Vatican called it the profile of the Unnamed One. The president, upon seeing it, ordered the briefing room sealed. Witnesses say he stared at the first page for minutes without moving, as though every word carried the weight of something more ancient than the office he held. The silence that followed was not empty. Across global networks, encrypted nodes stopped responding. Intelligence satellites reported interference from unknown origins, and agencies tasked with monitoring the unexplainable declared internal lockdowns. Someone, or something, did not want this profile to circulate further. But the question remains, why you? Why now? Within these pages lies the suggestion of a bloodline that has survived councils, empires, and wars. A bloodline whispered about in the margins of apocryphal texts and coded into rituals never meant for daylight. Some fragments even hint that a moment has arrived, one tied not to prophecy as we've been taught, but to a choice only you can make. The Vatican knew the cost of releasing this. The Oval Office knew the risk of acknowledging it. Yet the blackout that followed wasn't just technical. It was symbolic, a signal that the world of ordinary communication had ended, and a new chapter of hidden transmissions had begun. In the depths of the Vatican, beneath marble floors and candlelit corridors, there exists a vault that most will never see, sealed by layers of stone, guarded by centuries of ritual. This archive is said to hold more than just relics of saints and papal decrees. It is here that a dossier was placed, marked with an insignia older than the Vatican itself, a seal broken only in times when prophecy and power collide. The profile contained within was not catalogued in any official registry, not indexed among the shelves of papyrus and parchment. It was hidden within a chamber that requires both blood and word to open, a chamber designed to recognize only one lineage. The card at the front of the file bore no ordinary name. It was not a birth record or a baptism certificate. Instead, it carried a title written in archaic Latin, a phrase scholars refuse to translate in public, whispering only that its meaning ties to the one who cannot be erased. Alongside the title were images, distorted photographs, blurred like reflections on water, yet unmistakably tethered to you. Each image dated to years you could not have walked in, locations you could not have visited. Yet there you were, a silhouette repeating across history, an anomaly preserved by forces beyond human reach. The Vatican's archivists noted their unease. They wrote in margins that the file should not have survived the purge of older records. Some pages referenced councils long forgotten, secret gatherings where rulers bent their knee not to kingdoms, but to a shadow of prophecy. One priest, whose handwriting trembles across the notes, dared to connect it with the unspoken covenant, warning that if this file were ever released, it would tear the veil between what men govern and what heaven already declared. When the archivists sealed it once more, their intent was clear. It should never reach the outside world. Yet somehow, through encrypted channels and whispers across centuries, it did. A signal was triggered, sending the file beyond Rome's walls into the hands of the Oval Office. No one in the Vatican admitted to authorizing it. No one confessed to sending it. And yet, the transmission was traced back to the very heart of the archives, as if the vault itself had chosen to reveal you. The Oval Office had seen its share of classified reports, but none carried the same weight as the sealed Vatican file that landed on the president's desk. It arrived in a black diplomatic case, unmarked, escorted by men whose clearances surpassed the normal chain of command. Those present described the room falling into an unnatural stillness as the lock was broken. The air shifted, as though even the walls understood that what was being unveiled was not meant for the politics of men, but for the unraveling of something much larger. The president scanned the first page, his expression hollowing into silence. His advisors leaned forward, expecting an order, a dismissal, anything to break the tension. Instead, minutes passed without a word. The images within the dossier showed faces and places he recognized: world leaders, military bases, council chambers. Yet one figure appeared in every scene, a constant presence no one could explain. That figure was you. The documents stated dates that preceded your birth, transcripts of meetings in which your name was spoken long before you existed, and predictions written in language that blurred the line between intelligence and prophecy. What unsettled him most was the section written in red ink, a Vatican translation of an ancient passage. It read, "When the one who is seen but not placed arrives, the world shall bend toward silence." The phrase echoed like a warning, as though the very blackout that followed had been foretold. Advisors suggested the file was an elaborate fabrication, yet the president's gaze betrayed no certainty. He muttered a single name under his breath, Yeshua, as though it was the only point of reference he could cling to in the flood of impossibility. No one dared ask him what connection he saw. The briefing never ended. Phones ceased ringing, secure lines went dead, and satellites reported interference. It was as though the Oval Office itself had been cut off from the rest of the world, a room sealed by unseen hands. No exit was given, no closure declared, only the growing weight of the file pressing down on everyone inside. The president's final command before the blackout deepened was not to share the contents. His voice trembled as he said, "This was never meant for us. It was meant for them." The blackout began subtly. At first, it was just a delay in transmissions, a hesitation in signals traveling across the Atlantic cables. But within hours, entire sectors of communication went dark. Governments called it a technical fault, yet the engineers inside the data centers knew better. They reported systems shutting down not from failure, but from deliberate interference, as though an unseen hand had reached into the circuitry and silenced it. Satellites orbiting above flickered offline, their feeds interrupted by static patterns that resembled symbols rather than noise, and analysts swore those patterns bore resemblance to writings once recorded in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Financial institutions froze. Air traffic control systems switched to manual operation. Encryption keys used by global intelligence networks suddenly failed, leaving entire agencies blind. The blackout was selective, precise, targeting the arteries of control rather than the daily lives of citizens. Those who monitored the collapse noticed that certain names vanished from databases altogether. Files tied to those names were scrubbed clean, leaving only empty placeholders where identities once stood. Among them was yours. News outlets scrambled for explanations, though none could sustain a coherent story. Power grids continued to function, but communications stayed locked. A silence stretched across the globe, unnerving in its reach. Officials who gathered behind closed doors admitted what they could not say in public. This was not the failure of machines, but a message. A message tied directly to the Vatican file that had reached the Oval Office. Whispers began to surface among the few who pieced fragments together. They recalled passages where silence was described not as absence, but as a sign, and he answered them not a word. One archivist murmured, quoting a line attributed to Yeshua, suggesting that the blackout was not emptiness, but communication on a level humans had yet to grasp. The thought unsettled even the skeptics, for the silence seemed intelligent, deliberate, as if it carried intent. Those who still had fragments of access reported one final anomaly before the networks collapsed entirely. Across encrypted lines, one word appeared, untranslated, repeated in dozens of languages, but always pointing to the same origin. It pulsed once, then vanished. Long before the Vatican transmission reached the Oval Office, whispers circulated about a collection of documents too dangerous to be catalogued among ordinary archives. These were called the shadow files, sealed manuscripts said to trace a bloodline that threads through forgotten kingdoms, vanished empires, and clandestine councils. The origin of these files has never been confirmed, though fragments point to scribes who swore allegiance not to kings or popes, but to the continuity of a single name carried through generations. It is within these shadows that the line of Yeshua is said to have been preserved, written not in family trees but in coded symbols, maps, and hidden markers placed in temples and manuscripts. The files spoke of a lineage that did not disappear with the crucifixion, but instead scattered, concealed in plain sight, woven into the fabric of nations that would one day deny its existence. Researchers who stumbled upon these references often vanished, their work erased, as though history itself rejected the intrusion. Yet fragments survived, lists of surnames altered through time, artifacts whose inscriptions hinted at a blood that carried both human and divine resonance. Some records even pointed to an unbroken sequence of guardians whose task was to protect, not reveal, until the appointed hour. The dossier that stunned the Oval Office contained cross-references to these shadow files, as if the Vatican's sealed vault had been forced to acknowledge what it never intended to reveal. Your name appeared among the scattered fragments, tied not by genealogy in its ordinary sense, but through a cipher that linked key dates, migrations, and ancient vows. It was as if history itself had been waiting for your arrival to complete a pattern left unfinished for 2,000 years. Among the most chilling aspects of the shadow files was the repeated phrase found in multiple languages: "The blood that cannot be erased will awaken in silence." For centuries, this phrase had no clear meaning, but in the wake of the global blackout, it began to take on new weight. Scholars whispered that the silence itself may have been the trigger, the signal that the dormant bloodline was no longer hidden, but rising into visibility. Hidden beneath layers of intelligence agencies and classified projects lies a repository known only to a select few: the Black Vault. It is not a vault in the physical sense, though some claim its core rests within a subterranean complex outside Langley. Rather, it is a convergence of files gathered from every corner of the world, material too volatile to ever be released to the public. These files include accounts of anomalies, unexplained transmissions, encounters beyond the realm of science, and prophecies intersecting with geopolitics. Most who enter its archives never emerge with answers, only with deeper questions. When the Vatican transmission reached the Oval Office, it did not stay confined to the West Wing. Within hours, a mirrored copy of the file appeared in the Black Vault's network, though no one has confessed to uploading it. The security protocols are considered impenetrable, yet the file bypassed them effortlessly, almost as though the system had been waiting for it. Analysts inside the vault reported anomalies immediately. Cross-references began linking the Vatican dossier with older entries that had long been sealed. Reports of apparitions witnessed in deserts, mysterious inscriptions discovered in ruins, and even intercepted communications from satellites were suddenly tied together under a single classification. What disturbed them most was the recurring image of you, scattered across decades of unrelated events. Photographs, sketches, even written testimonies from witnesses in the past century, all aligned to the same description. Analysts debated whether it was a fabrication planted across time or something beyond manipulation. Yet, when the fragments aligned, one phrase appeared, echoing across centuries: the one seen, the one hidden, the one awaited. Deeper within the Black Vault, a subfolder opened automatically, as if triggered by the Vatican file's arrival. Inside were redacted transcripts of conversations between world leaders, clergy, and scholars. Within these conversations, a name surfaced repeatedly: Yeshua, always in reference to a connection between a living figure and an eternal covenant. The documents stopped short of making the link explicit, but the implication was there. Your existence tied to a lineage none dared speak of openly. The Black Vault was never meant to release secrets, yet with each page that surfaced, it seemed less like a storage facility and more like a mechanism designed to activate when the right profile entered. The Vatican file and the Black Vault anomalies were unsettling enough, but the true shock came when the analysts began cross-referencing the redacted transcripts. At first, the pages appeared like countless other classified documents, thick black lines covering names, dates, and sensitive details. Yet under enhanced imaging, faint impressions beneath the ink revealed fragments that should never have been visible. Scanners exposed letters pressed too deeply into the paper, creating shadows of words that survived the attempt at erasure. Among those shadows, one name surfaced more often than any other: Yeshua. The repetition was not random. The name appeared beside references to meetings between leaders who should have had no knowledge of ancient texts. Presidents, prime ministers, popes, and generals, all recorded in conversations where the name was spoken in hushed tones, as though invoking it carried consequences. Some transcripts revealed Yeshua linked to directives about monitoring a lineage, while others tied his name to operations halted without explanation. It was as if governments across decades had stumbled upon the same truth, only to bury it beneath ink and silence. What unsettled the archivists most was the context in which the name emerged. In one transcript, an advisor warned a head of state that the covenant remains unbroken, and its heir has not yet been silenced. Another redacted note included a passage in Greek that translated to, "The silence is not the end, but the preparation for the word." These were not theological reflections, but strategic discussions, as if the figure of Yeshua was not confined to Scripture, but was active within intelligence operations and global councils. Your name, too, appeared in connection with the redactions. The documents showed it written in code, side by side with Yeshua's, though no official explanation clarified why. Some suggested it was metaphor, others a cryptographic marker. Yet the alignment felt deliberate, as if centuries of concealment had been pierced by a design larger than bureaucracy. The more redacted pages were reviewed, the clearer the pattern became. The erasures were not meant to hide the truth, but to preserve it until a moment of unveiling. The ink that obscured his name was not suppression, but delay, a way to ensure it could only be revealed in the right time, to the right person. Far from the public halls of government and cathedral, there exists a chamber whispered about in fragments, and feared even by those who claim to serve it. This is the sealed room, a place said to reside beneath a fortified estate, guarded not by soldiers, but by oaths older than nations. Within it gathers the Council of 13, a conclave whose members are drawn from bloodlines that have steered kingdoms, economies, and faith for centuries. Officially, the Council does not exist, yet traces of its meetings surface in scattered memos and intercepted transmissions. The Vatican file, once released, carried enough weight to summon them once again. The room itself has been described by the few who survived proximity. Long wooden tables, scarred by centuries of signatures, torches burning with oil, imported from lands considered sacred, and a single codex placed at the center, chained to the stone so that no one may remove it. This codex is opened only when matters threaten the balance of power between heaven and earth. On the night your profile arrived in the Oval Office, the Council convened, their presence signaled by a sudden blackout of surveillance over the region where the sealed room lies. Each member carries a title rather than a name, titles passed from one generation to the next. They are keepers of silence, guardians of thresholds, interpreters of ancient contracts. Yet as the file was laid before them, even they hesitated. Among the scattered photographs and transcripts, your presence was undeniable, appearing across epochs where no natural explanation could place you. Some argued you were an intrusion, a fabrication planted to destabilize order. Others whispered that the bloodline they had worked so hard to suppress had resurfaced, impossible to erase. One of the eldest members rose to read aloud from the chained codex, his voice trembling as he repeated a line in its archaic tongue. Though its exact translation remains disputed, fragments suggest it referenced Yeshua and the covenant bound to his blood. The passage warned of a moment when silence would fracture, and the heir to the unbroken line would stand before both thrones of men and altars of heaven. The council grew restless, yet none dared dismiss it, for the codex had never spoken in vain. The world has always been guided by two currents, one of prophecy and one of power. Prophecy speaks in whispers, in ancient texts and hidden visions, while power speaks in decrees, armies, and laws written for control. Rarely do these currents collide, but when they do, history fractures. The Vatican file and the silence that followed signaled that collision, for what had been buried in scripture now pressed against the walls of governments and councils. It was no longer just faith or politics, it was both, converging in ways the world was unprepared to witness. In the heart of Europe, scholars revisited manuscripts locked away for centuries, texts that warned of a figure who would stand between empires and revelations. They found references to a crossroads where thrones of men would meet the promises of heaven, a place not mapped in geography, but in time. Each clue pointed to a convergence marked by disruptions, and the global blackout seemed to fit the pattern. The silence was not absence, they said, but alignment, a signal that prophecy and power had reached the same intersection. Governments attempted to interpret the moment in their own way. Some framed it as a security breach, others as a sign of supernatural interference, yet none could deny the dossier's influence. In closed sessions, leaders debated what it meant for their positions if prophecy had suddenly stepped into their councils. One advisor warned that ignoring it would not prevent its unfolding, for prophecy was not bound by votes or treaties. Another claimed that the bloodline referenced in the redacted pages was already moving, and to resist it was to resist the current of history itself. Among these debates, the name of Yeshua returned again and again, not as a figure of distant faith, but as a living reference point. His covenant, whispered through fragmented records, seemed to draw a line that cut through politics and into destiny. Those who acknowledged this grew uneasy, for to admit it was to concede that power alone could not shape the future. The crossroads stood before them, prophecy on one side, power on the other. Yet at the center of this intersection, only one figure remained constant: you. The blackout that swept across global networks was not entirely without pattern. Analysts who sifted through the remnants of corrupted code began noticing fragments that repeated themselves in impossible sequences. At first, they dismissed it as static, but as the symbols were layered, a structure began to emerge. Hidden within the collapse was an encryption key, one not generated by any known algorithm, but woven through ancient scripts. The Vatican specialists recognized traces of Aramaic phrases, while cryptographers noticed mathematical symmetries aligning with sacred geometry. The key was alive within the silence, pulsing like a heartbeat across the void of communications. What startled the few who understood it was the central phrase that repeated in the core of the code: Yeshua. His name, encrypted not as mere letters, but as a multi-dimensional cipher, carried across the fragments. It was as if the blackout had not shut systems down, but reprogrammed them, embedding a hidden message for those able to listen. Attempts to decode it triggered unusual anomalies. Screens flickered with images that resembled manuscripts long destroyed. Voices whispered across dead channels, and in one instance a researcher claimed he heard the line, "The word shall return in silence," echo through his speakers, though no signal was detected. The encryption key defied conventional technology. When fed into standard systems, it resisted translation, splitting into countless variations. Yet when overlaid with sacred texts, it aligned perfectly with verses thought long lost. Some suggested it was not a key for unlocking files, but a key for unlocking people, a resonance designed to awaken memory within those bound to the covenant. If true, then the blackout was not an accident, but an initiation, a test to reveal who could withstand the frequency embedded in the silence. Your name reappeared within the patterns, not spelled out, but formed in numerical ciphers that pointed to birth dates, coordinates, and timelines. The implication was undeniable. You were encoded into the very structure of the silence. The Vatican archivists feared what this meant, while intelligence officials insisted it confirmed the bloodline's continuity. Yet neither side could control the key itself, for it moved like breath, impossible to contain. In the days following the blackout, as fragments of the Vatican file continued to surface in hidden networks, anticipation grew that a disclosure was imminent. Intelligence agencies prepared contingency statements, world leaders rehearsed speeches, and the media quietly positioned anchors for the moment the truth could no longer be contained. For a brief span of hours, it seemed inevitable that the contents of the profile would be revealed to the world. The stage was set, the words drafted, the world unknowingly standing at the edge of revelation. Then came the interruption. It did not strike like the silence before. This time, systems did not simply go dark, they froze. Monitors locked in place, displaying symbols instead of error codes. Clocks stopped at identical timestamps across multiple continents. Flight control towers reported instruments halting mid-sequence, leaving pilots flying blind until backup systems restored. Researchers studying the Vatican encryption saw the symbols reorganize themselves into patterns resembling celestial constellations, and astronomers confirmed they matched the positions of the heavens on a single date 2,000 years ago. At the center of the pattern appeared a single line, projected across every frozen screen. The word was made flesh, and the silence could not contain it. Scholars recognize the echo of a verse attributed to Yeshua, yet the form in which it manifested was not scripture, but signal, etched into the very fabric of the world's digital core. Whatever force had woven itself into the Vatican file had not finished its work. It had only paused, biding its time until the world reached this threshold. In government chambers, panic replaced preparation. Disclosure was halted, the drafted speeches locked away. No leader wished to speak in the shadow of a message they could not control. The president who first saw your profile remained secluded, his advisors unable to draw him back into public light. Across the Vatican, bells rang at unscheduled hours, as if struck by unseen hands. Some took it as warning, others as announcement. Yet all agreed the interruption was deliberate. The disclosure was no longer in their hands. It had shifted, crossing beyond councils, presidents, and vaults.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.